There we go. Hello, everyone. Hello again for some of you that saw my talk earlier today. So I am going to talk about a framework for the localization of programming languages. So if kids start to learn programming, if they have a programming exercise, this is just something from a book, then very often in the first real programming chapter, the exercise is going to be adding two numbers. That's very, very often the first thing you see in programming books. And because my name is Felienne Hermans and I work on programming education, this is something that I ran into. Some of you might have seen in the morning that I built a localized programming language called the Hedy programming language that looks like this. From the beginning, Hedy was a language that was bilingual in the sense that, as you can see here, the UI is in Dutch. All the buttons are in Dutch, the explanation is in Dutch. This is how I first made it. So it was always this system that was in two languages. But when we did our first user study, this was published at VLHSC in 2021, I asked kids, hey, how can we make Hedy better? And they wanted to have local keywords. That's the thing that they asked me for, which I was a bit surprised by, because I thought, well, Dutch teenagers, they will know English. Why do you need this? But it was a fun challenge to build, and you have to listen to your users. So quite early on in the process, we actually made Hedy be bilingual, so you can program in Dutch and English, and you may also mix the keywords. So vraag here is ask in my native language. And if you make a mistake, then, for example, you type vraag, then you get an error message, which is also localized. So very early in the process of building Hedy, the UI was localized and the keywords were also localized. So then I thought, very cool, my programming language is entirely localized. We are done. We have keywords in many other languages. But then Alaaeddin Swidan, my co-author, who's right there, he was like, yes, very nice, but what about Arabic numerals, right? Some of you have seen this before, but not everyone, that what I have thought for 37 years to be Arabic numerals, these things, aren't actually the numerals that actual Arabic uses. They have a slightly different character set. So these straightforward calculations that are very, very easy are only straightforward if your numbers are my numbers are the ones we are all knowing as Arabic numerals, which aren't Arabic numerals. So if you try Python, if you ask him to do 5 plus 7 in Arabic numerals, then you'll get an error message that isn't great. So then I thought, well, what else do I not know if I don't know about numbers? Maybe there are many other things that programming languages could localize in ways that I don't know about. So I thought, okay, this is going to be wild. So wild that it turned into a paper that me and Alaaeddin co-authored, a framework for the localization of programming languages, which describes 12 parts of programming languages that you could localize. So we're going to go over a few aspects of programming languages that could be localized, where you will consistently see that most of the design decisions we're making in tools for building programming languages like IDEs and parsing very much rely on English or Western thinking. So we have seen these two parts already of the framework, things that you can localize. You've seen non-English keywords. This is Dutch, for example. And you've seen non-English error messages. So these are things you have seen. We talked a little bit already about non-English numerals, but I want to dive a little bit deeper into the numerals. But first, let's talk about building programming languages. That's what we're here for, right? If you're building a programming language, probably you're doing more or less this, where you have some code, you have a grammar that describes what the code looks like, then you have a parser that parses with the grammar your code, and then if you have a parse tree, there's magical execution. It can be a compiler or an interpreter. Something is going to process this parse tree. So of course, if I ask you, what would you read or recommend if you want to learn how to build a programming language, you would say, the Dragon Book. Ding, 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 ding. Yes, the Dragon Book. Absolutely. If you look in the Dragon Book, like, what do they say about digits? Digits, digits, digits. What are digits? You can add them, you can subtract them. They are digits, but they are these digits, the Western digits. And nowhere in the Dragon book at all, ever, do they really explain that these are English or Western digits. It's just like, these are digits. But the Dragon book may be a little bit old-fashioned. What about learning a programming language in 2023? What would you recommend to younger people that's maybe more modern than the Dragon book, that's more likely to be more inclusive?
Essentials of programming language,
Third editions. I'm counting on my colleague who's right there. He knows what I'm going to say. Crafting interpreters. I love Crafting Interpreters. It is a fantastic book that's very, very readable. It's almost like a novel about someone building programming languages. I love this book. However, it too has this, right? It too has 0, my 0 to 9. So no one really seems to be integrating this. When I was an undergrad, I took like 5 compiler courses. None of these courses ever mentioned that there aren't only English numerals that are different ones. So this is why we live in the world we live in, where if you ask to do this in Arabic, you get error messages. And as I said also a little bit in my talk in the morning, this isn't necessarily very hard. You go to your grammar, and instead of having 0 to 9, you can just have the Arabic number for 0, interestingly enough, is pronounced as suffer, which says something about us building things. So you can go from suffer to tissa. You just add these characters to your grammar. It's not so very hard. If you actually try to type this in most editors, after you now hit the next key, this will happen, because it's trying to guess that you're in a right-to-left language, and it already starts to look very weird. But this just works, right? You just add this number to your grammar, and then you don't even have to change many things for it to just work. This is an example I showed earlier with a loop counter in a for loop. This just works, and if you want to, you can also have some conversion in the output. This is not so very hard. But there are other numeral systems. This is an example from our paper, just listing the most common ones that are used around the world, but actually the newest Unicode standard supports 58 different numeral systems. This is from the Unicode spec. So there are many numeral systems. Probably you don't want to manually copy them into your grammar if you want to make this change, but Unicode has this really nice idea of character classes, whereas this comes from our actual code base of Hedy. You can just do this, which just means all the number systems, even if we add new ones, they will be added to the character class, so this works. So it's not so hard, actually. If you are curious or interested in building this into your programming system, if you would just do this, then most of it will actually work on the parsing side. One more thing that's just very curious is I thought, being a Westerner, that if this is Arabic, you see that that is the digit for 10. The first thing that you encounter, going from the right, is the 1. And the next one that you encounter is the 0. So this would be 10. It is not 10. Actually, this is 10. It is the other way around. So the numbers are in our direction, even though all the text around it is in a different direction. So I didn't know this also, so we had a few errors because I didn't swap the number in the reading direction. So yes, many things I didn't know a few years ago about languages. So non-English numerals, we have covered them. And the interesting thing is I very much care about learning, right? I want to make programming languages more learnable, easier to learn. So I figured if we are in a world in which we have Arabic everywhere, then of course if you have these Arabic numerals, this is easier to read. But something I learned also again from Alaaeddin is that it's also more usable, because if you are in a setting of Arabic on your keyboard, you'll have to switch keyboards if you want to mix Arabic and Western numerals. So here you have to do Arabic, you have to press a button to switch to English letters or numbers, and then you have to switch back all the time. And this is also, again, an argument in favor of having localization in programming languages, because if you are typing Arabic strings and English keywords, there too you would have to switch keyboards physically, going from this one to the other one with a button press or a mouse click. So it's not only about being more inclusive, it's also just very much a matter of practicality. So we talked about keywords, numerals, and error messages so far. Let's talk about right to left parsing. This is what I was most worried about, actually. I thought, oh, everything is the other way around. This is going to be very confusing because this is a heady program, but also this is a heady program. This is actually the easy part. It took us almost no effort to get this working because text in the computer is actually not stored left to right or right to left. It's just stored from the beginning to the end. And the presentation is up to programs. That has some downsides as well, but this, if you're debugging this, for example, here you have a little bit of Arabic code, the input string will just be the string as you see it there. So the first character is the first character in the reading order. For my Western brain, this gets really confusing, because if I now want to get the first character of this string, then I will get the first character, which is the first one there, these two. Firstly, this is confusing to me, because I was expecting to get the exclamation mark, because I'm so used to having the first one being the left one for me. And also, this is the same letter. But it looks a little bit different. So depending on the next letter, Arabic letters can look differently, which is something you really have to get used to. And there's quite some software systems that do this presentation wrong because they do not connect the letters well, and then you get really, really weird results. There's one interesting aspect, though, in all the strings just being reversed. One intricate problem is this. What about brackets? So if you have this string in Arabic, the first bracket that you're going to read is a closing bracket. So now your grammar gets confused because it is opening, but it is actually closing. So here, one of the few cases in this whole adventure where actually operating systems were my friend, because this works, because actually fonts fix that. So if you're typing in a right to left language and you're typing a closing bracket, then it knows you want to do an opening bracket. It will store an opening bracket and show you a closing bracket. There's a little bit of magic right there. So right to left parsing just works. That was actually a thing I was worried about, but it was not so very hard to get done. So we talked about, right to left support is one of the aspects. If you're building a programming language in a localized way, at least you might want to think about what that means, specifically in terms of presentation and less in terms of programming language design. So let's talk about quotes. Quotes, these guys, or maybe if you're in Python, triple quotes or a backtick quotes, or guillemets in French, or in Chinese, people use these type of quotes that are blocks because they can also be used like this. And interestingly enough, another thing I didn't know, Danish traditionally also uses guillemets, but the other way around. So like this. They call these goose eyes because it's like this. So this too is something that you could support, right? As I said also in the morning, it doesn't really cost you much to support these characters because probably your grammar isn't using them anywhere. Here again, this is not only a matter of being inclusive so that it looks like normal French, it's also very much a matter of ergonomics. Because in many European keyboard settings, you have a mechanism called a dead key mechanism. So if you want to type a letter in French or in Dutch that has an accent on it, you do that by first pressing a quote and then pressing the letter. So if I'm teaching in the Netherlands, this is a consistent struggle I have because I tell kids, you have to use a quote. And what happens, here you see it in French as well, I'm typing a quote, and this is what it looks like. This is what happens when you type a quote. In some settings, if you do this in Windows, it won't even show you the weird thing, it just will show you nothing. It won't show you anything. I see some nodding Europeans in the audience. And then you type the next letter, and then you get the accent on the letter. So kids are typing like this, and they're not looking at the screen because they're looking at their fingers because they can't type. So they type a quote, and then they type a letter, and then it does this. And they're like, but teacher, I put the quote there. and then it's not there. So in some keyboard settings, some quote symbols are just so much easier to access. On a French keyboard, guillemets would be easier to type, and it wouldn't have all these confusing side effects. So here you see that programming language design can take into account what operating systems are doing, but usually it doesn't. And then you get this very annoying behavior where a character that you pick for a language, you might say it doesn't matter, but thinking about where this is on your keyboard in different locales very much supports localization easiness. So we talked about local punctuation in one aspect, so we talked about quote, but there's so much more to talk about. Did you know, I didn't know this, that of course Arabic has commas, and think about our comma, it points towards the beginning of the sentence. So of course an Arabic comma also points towards the beginning of the sentence, so it's now pointing to me. And for reasons that are unknown to me and my Arabic speaking co-author, the comma also points upwards. We don't know why, but it points upwards and this direction. So this is a little bit of Hadi code that also actually works. So we also support Arabic commas and Chinese commas as list separators. So let's talk about culture. So different cultures might have different ways of interacting with language. This is very much true for the Arabic culture, where culturally it's not so common to depict humans and animals in art. That's not a thing that they do. So they have fantastic things like this. This is Alhambra Mosque in Granada, which if you look at it well and you know a little bit of Arabic, you will see that this is almost entirely letters. Like this is letters, this is letters. I got up to here, and of course, Alaaeddin was like, but there are more letters. These are also letters. All of these things are letters, right? And therefore, Arabic has all these very cool things they want to do with letters to allow them to make it prettier, which usually Western language don't do, like this principle that's called a tatwil or a kashida, which is a character that you can use to prolong this connection between two letters that we've seen before. Here's a little bit of Arabic writing, where you see the one in red is a very pronounced one, but also lower you see that the connection can be longer or shorter, so that the text is really lined out very well. So we have implemented already a few things, and now here's Alaaeddin saying, well, wouldn't it be cool if we could also support this tatwil, because if kids are learning to program, probably they want to prolong their connections. For example, here you have a little bit of code that just, it doesn't look nice. It doesn't look organized. Wouldn't it be nicer if you could do this? And you can, this runs, this is syntax highlights and runs, this actually works, so that you can line out everything. And this is, again, it's like two things. Like one thing is we're allowing people that come from different language systems to express their things. But also, I love this. I want to support print, so I can also line out my code like this, right? So it's not just about giving people access, it's also about learning from each other. Who doesn't like this? Like programmers, they like beauty, right? This is the thing we say. So clearly, this is better than this. You know what's not better? The grammar we need to support this. So again, if you're easily offended, you might want to close your eyes for the next slide. But you can also see on GitHub that this is our actual grammar. Here we go. This is my grammar. So in between all the letters, I allow an arbitrary number of what for you looks like underscores, but it's actually a different Unicode character. It's the tatwil, and it's supported everywhere. So I have a little preprocessor in my grammar where I split up all the keywords and put in between all these tatwils everywhere. And because of the right to left layout, this last part with the 2 stars that looks like a smiley is very weird. That star actually belongs in the beginning, but it isn't also properly rendered. So you can imagine a world in which it would be very easy to do this, in which somewhere in your grammar framework you would simply say, ignore white space and ignore tatwils, and it would ignore it in the relevant places. You cannot ignore it everywhere, because if you use it in a string, you want to keep it there. So sometimes it has to stay, and sometimes it's irrelevant, like in a keyword, but we do not live in this world. We live in that world where this is my grammar, which I don't love, but it works, and you can create beautiful Arabic programs. So that's one thing, characters without meaning. We have a few other examples in the paper where some languages support all sorts of these characters where it's not necessarily adding to the programming language in the traditional sense, but it's adding something. The things we've seen so far are easy, right? This is all stuff, if you want to add this to your language, you can. It's just a little bit of changing your parser and then it will work. And of course, the paper has some tips about how to do it. One thing that's a lot harder that we don't properly support yet is localized productions. So English has a certain order of words that not all languages also have. For example, if you have an if statement in a Python-like language, you will say if condition and then a tab and then a number of statements. And that sounds Englishy, right? So you can say if name is Jan, print hello, which is a bit like an English sentence. But if you're Dutch like me, this is not a sentence. This is weird. In my language, you would actually say, if name Jan is. This is the word order that I grew up with, and I have kids in my classroom type stuff like this, because it makes more sense to do this, if name Jan is, right? So then you will have to have a different production where the equality sign moves to the end of the line to create a sentence, which just, if you think about it, it looks really weird. Oh, sorry. It looks really weird if name Jan is, but this is our word order. And there's so many different word orders that different languages have. I see a Japanese person like, yeah, everything is different. Here's another example. In Turkish, you don't say while and then the condition. You actually say condition and then while. So iken is the Turkish word. So first you would say the condition and then the keyword would come after. And then of course you're going to the realm of, yeah, that's going to be hard to parse. That's going to be hard to process because first a condition and then the keyword. And there's so many examples of word orders that are slightly different. There's also this example in Chinese where the word in, like for I in range, is 3 characters, but then 2 characters go before the word in and 1 character goes after the word in. So you sort of split the keyword around the argument. This is all going to be very hard to parse. And also, the way we're supporting this now is people send me emails and I try to build what they want. But there's a very interesting user experience challenge also is, how do I explain to people what the freedoms are that we could support, even if we don't know if we're going to support it? People are not going to imagine, oh, but we could split a keyword. Oh, but everything could be different. So how to communicate about such a local production is also a very interesting challenge. So this is what we talked about. There's more in the framework. We have 12 aspects actually, just to show you this is the things that we ended up not talking about in a brief talk. So variable names, diacritics, alternative keywords, and multilingual programming. If you look in the paper, we have a table in the paper which is sort of the meat, where we talk about all of these aspects in relation to actually existing programming languages. So here you see Hadi. Hadi supports the things we talked about, unsurprisingly, but Hadi doesn't support localized productions well. Fun fact, I had an SLE paper about this last year, but it hasn't made it into our actual code base because it's really hard. But then there are other languages that do support localized production. So I think with this we are showing both that these aspects that we're presenting are valuable because people support them, and also they're possible because people support them. So it shows that this isn't just a random set of hypothetical things that I think people could do, it's actually a set of things that people are already doing, but if you look at the entire framework, then all of them are supporting some of the aspects, but it's very, very hard to support all of them properly because all of them are really hard, and the more you want, the more generic your parser is going to be, the slower and the more cumbersome and the harder to maintain. So this has been a framework for the localization of programming languages. Do check out the full paper where we really go into detail about all these different localized programming languages and what to support. And try to, if you are building new programming languages, think of us. At least a few of these things are really quite easy to support, and it really makes a big difference.
Thank you. So we are entering into lunch territory here. Maybe we'll do an abbreviated discussion. We'll do a couple minutes, and then we'll have a question, and then yeah, and then we can maybe move the discussion into the lunch period. Okay? let's wrap up the discussions, and we have time for maybe a couple short questions or one longer question.
I'll try to be brief in my answers, which is not my strong suit.
Hi. So you talked about a lot of the technical challenges of localization, and you started to touch on like the cultural aspects. But I think there's so many languages have like a formality distinction, right? Where in English, I don't care if my computer addresses me as "Yo, what's up?" But if the computer says the same thing to me in the Hindi or Marathi equivalent, which I also speak, I'd be a bit insulted. Like, you're a lowly computer. I am a human. You have to respect me. Say, the same.
I love that.
The same goes for like gender. Like, you know, in English you can just type in adjectives and the computer spits them back at you. But if the adjective depends on the gender of the speaker, then the computer can't just produce, like, you can't just say you are happy. It has to be you are happy, comma, masculine or something, right?
Yeah.
And again, this is also about inclusivity and making sure that all users feel like the computer is speaking to them and not assuming some masculine programmer. So have you looked into that sort of cultural or beyond the technical aspects of this localization stuff?
Yes, definitely. So most of the translations that we have are made by people that are native speakers. So they will take these things into account. For example, in, I think this is Portuguese, it says like hello with A and O at the end with a slash, so that you can be both male and female if you're the reader. These things also happen sometimes in error messages. The German translation has sometimes more the formal form than the informal form. So because of all of these languages are all contributed by volunteers that are coming from those languages and cultures, they are the ones that take that into account. In terms of language design, one thing that we didn't talk about is alternative keywords. So we do support, for example, is in Arabic can be male or female depending on the gender of the variable. So we don't just support one keyword, we support two keywords, and we can support multiple keywords for other languages. So a little bit of that is also programming language design, but a lot of that is like, I talked about this like it's my thing, but I started it, but we have these 47 different languages and we have hundreds of volunteers that have contributed to that, and then they're the ones that express it in a way that respects their culture. Sometimes they come ask me, like the Chinese translators or the French translators, like, what do you think we should do? And I'm like, you discuss this amongst yourselves, and I don't know, right? Because I want to empower you to do it in a way that you want. So it's also very much about letting go. It's really weird that there's this website with my name on it and it has 44 languages and I have no clue what it says. But that letting go, that if you do this with a group, then you trust them to take that into account. I don't have to like police all of that.
So, just wondering, who have used these language versions? Like, are there Arabic-speaking students or other language-speaking students? What's the actual teaching experience been like?
Yes, that's a great question. So maybe the best place to ask that would be on our Discord, where all of these teachers also hang out. Like, I can talk about my experience of teaching in Dutch, but Dutch and English, if you do like this, it is the same language. So it might not be the most interesting experience, but we have users worldwide. So our biggest users are, in addition to the Netherlands, Indonesia, Puerto Rico, Pakistan is really big, Hindi is also quite big. So there are people that are just more interesting for you to talk to. We have Japanese, we have Korean, we have different versions of Chinese. These languages are maybe more closer to the experience that you might have or you might be interested in. So I would say go on the Discord and ask people that are teaching in right to left and non-Latin languages, because my half English Dutch, it's just not, I'm not the most interesting source of stories about that.
Okay, so let's thank the speaker again.